Something far more demanding than your first breakthrough may already be unfolding inside you. And if you've started sensing that the version of yourself you worked so hard to become no longer feels completely authentic, then you are standing at the entrance of a transformation that many people never expect. There is a common belief that awakening is a single destination, a moment when life suddenly becomes lighter, clearer, and permanently peaceful. Yet that expectation rarely survives real experience. The first awakening certainly changes everything, but it does not complete the journey. It simply opens the first door. What comes afterward is far more subtle, far more personal, and far more difficult to recognize because it does not ask you to discover a new reality. It asks you to question the identity you built after discovering that reality. The first awakening often arrives through disruption. It appears after a relationship collapses, after grief settles into your heart, after failure strips away certainty, or during a season when nothing around you seems to make sense anymore. Those painful moments become invitations to search for something greater. You begin exploring new ideas, new perspectives, new symbols, and new language that finally gives meaning to experiences you could never explain before. Everything feels expansive because you are seeing beyond the limits of your previous life. Yet the second awakening follows a completely different path. Instead of collecting more beliefs, it quietly begins revealing that the identity you created during your first spiritual expansion can become another disguise. You may become fluent in conversations about energy, intuition, alignment, purpose, and consciousness. You may appear deeply spiritual to everyone around you, and you may sincerely believe every word you speak. Still, beneath those carefully learned concepts, there may remain truths your soul has been patiently waiting for you to acknowledge. That is exactly where the second awakening begins its work. It does not simply free you from the person you once were. It gently but relentlessly dismantles the person you became after your first awakening. The process is not about exposing ignorance. It is about exposing the sophisticated ways healing itself can become another place to hide. Gradually, you begin recognizing moments when familiar spiritual expressions were not serving as wisdom but as emotional armor. Statements about everything happening for a reason. Remaining positive, trusting the process, or detaching from outcomes may once have offered genuine comfort during your darkest hours. They helped organize chaos when your life first unraveled. They gave your suffering a language that made survival possible. But during the second awakening, those same phrases begin losing their ability to protect you whenever they become substitutes for difficult conversations, financial responsibility, physical health, unresolved conflict, fear, grief, or important decisions that have been postponed again and again. Instead of creating freedom, they begin exposing avoidance. That realization can feel deeply unsettling because it challenges ideas that once felt sacred. Yet this discomfort is not evidence that you are moving backward. It is evidence that your honesty is becoming stronger than your need to preserve a comforting identity. From the outside, people may even assume you have become less spiritual because your behavior changes in unexpected ways. You no longer feel compelled to perform endless calmness for the approval of others. You stop forcing forgiveness before your heart is genuinely ready. You stop pretending you have detached from situations when, in reality, fear is still asking to be understood instead of ignored. Ironically, this willingness to acknowledge your humanity becomes the place where authentic awakening grows deeper than appearances ever could. As this second awakening unfolds, even your relationship with money begins transforming into something far more revealing than numbers in a bank account. Financial choices become emotional mirrors reflecting hidden beliefs about trust, self-worth, security, fear, and the future you truly believe is possible for yourself. Ordinary decisions suddenly carry unexpected emotional weight. Saving money may arise from wisdom, or it may quietly expose anxiety. Spending may express genuine alignment with your values, or it may become an attempt to escape inner discomfort. Raising your prices, making investments, declining opportunities that no longer honor you, or asking to receive what your work is genuinely worth, all begin uncovering the invisible beliefs still governing your life. That is why money becomes such an intense point of pressure during this stage. It is one of the clearest places where spiritual philosophy collides with everyday reality. Anyone can claim to trust life's unfolding, yet financial decisions often reveal exactly where fear continues directing that trust behind the scenes. Money itself is never the real examination. Its importance comes from its remarkable ability to uncover whatever still holds authority over your inner world. As this transformation deepens, another unexpected shift often emerges. You may notice yourself becoming cautious around people who sound absolutely certain about every spiritual truth. This does not happen because you have become cynical or because your faith has disappeared. It happens because your awareness becomes sensitive enough to recognize when certainty itself is trying to replace genuine perception with another invisible prison. During your first awakening, certainty often feels comforting. Discovering a teacher, a philosophy, a community, or a spiritual path can finally provide answers after years of confusion. For a time, that structure feels necessary because it gives stability while your old worldview collapses. But the second awakening slowly reveals that every system eventually reaches its limits. Every teacher carries unseen blind spots. Every philosophy, no matter how beautiful, can become restrictive the moment questioning disappears. This realization can initially feel like confusion, yet what is actually happening is something much more profound. Your honesty is becoming more valuable than borrowed certainty. The deeper your awareness grows, the less you require reality to fit inside perfectly organized explanations. You no longer feel compelled to reduce every mystery into a simple slogan, or force every emotional experience to obey a single spiritual principle. Instead, you become comfortable standing in the presence of uncertainty without believing uncertainty as failure. You discover the quiet strength of admitting that some truths cannot yet be fully understood. Saying that you do not completely know no longer threatens your identity, because awakening is no longer measured by how many answers you can collect. It is measured by your willingness to stop pretending certainty, where honesty is asking to be spoken. And that quiet shift becomes one of the clearest signs that the second awakening is not taking you away from truth, but leading you more deeply into it. There comes a moment in this deeper phase of transformation that catches almost everyone by surprise, because the conflict is no longer happening between you and the outside world. It is happening between different versions of yourself. You may notice that ideas you once embraced without hesitation suddenly begin meeting resistance from somewhere deep inside your own awareness. No one else has to challenge you because your own mind quietly begins asking questions that never appeared before. A phrase that once brought comfort now echoes differently. A lesson you once repeated with complete confidence suddenly feels unfinished. Advice you sincerely offered to others may now leave you feeling unexpectedly uncomfortable. There may even be moments when you look back at the certainty you once carried and feel a quiet sense of humility, not because you were foolish, but because you can now see how much more there was to understand. This does not erase the value of those earlier beliefs. They served an important purpose. They arrived during a season when your pain required a language strong enough to hold it together. They helped you survive experiences that otherwise might have felt unbearable. They created order when your inner world seemed impossible to navigate. They offered meaning when chaos threatened to consume everything familiar. Yet the second awakening introduces a truth that many people resist accepting. A belief can rescue you during one chapter of your life and still become a limitation in the next. That realization is not merely intellectual. It reaches into the foundation of your identity because the ideas that once protected you are now being examined by the very awareness they helped awaken. This is why the process feels so emotionally intense. You are not simply replacing one opinion with another. You are witnessing your inner world renegotiate the structure of who you believe yourself to be. One part of you still longs for the comfort that certainty once provided. It remembers how reassuring those explanations felt when everything seemed uncertain. Another part of you, however, has grown beyond needing comfort at the expense of honesty. It begins recognizing that certainty and truth are not always the same experience. That is when the internal conversation becomes impossible to ignore. You may hear yourself repeating that everything happens for a reason, only to discover another voice gently reminding you that understanding meaning does not require pretending the pain never mattered. You may tell yourself that trusting the process is enough, while something deeper quietly responds that trust cannot become permission to postpone the difficult choices your life is asking you to make. You may insist that you have detached from a situation. Yet another part of your awareness asks whether you have truly found peace or whether you are simply hiding your vulnerability. because acknowledging how much you still care feels too frightening. These moments are rarely peaceful. They create an inner dialogue that can seem louder than any external conflict, because what is dissolving is not merely a collection of ideas. What is dissolving is the version of yourself that depended on those ideas to feel protected, significant, healed, secure, or spiritually complete. The second awakening reaches its turning point when the truth that once expanded your world no longer feels spacious enough to contain who you are becoming. That is precisely why this stage carries such profound importance. It reveals that something inside you has stopped accepting comforting explanations simply because they once worked. Instead, you begin searching for understanding that remains steady when life becomes messy, uncertain, and emotionally demanding. You start valuing truth that survives real experience rather than truth that sounds inspiring only during peaceful moments. As this transformation continues unfolding, another remarkable shift begins revealing itself in your everyday life. Without trying to predict the future or imagine mystical visions, you notice your awareness becoming unusually sensitive to direction. Situations begin communicating their destination almost as soon as they appear. A new opportunity, a familiar habit, a financial decision, a commitment, a personal goal, or even a recurring pattern of behavior suddenly carries a subtle sense of where it is ultimately leading. You recognize the ending hidden quietly within the beginning. Exciting possibilities may still appear attractive on the surface, yet something within you already senses whether they will eventually leave you exhausted. Promises that once sounded appealing now reveal the pressure they may create months later. Small compromises begin exposing the larger life they are gradually constructing. Temporary comforts quietly reveal the traps they could become, if repeated often enough. This heightened awareness is both liberating and frustrating because another part of you may still crave the immediate satisfaction those choices promise. You may still want to accept the invitation, pursue the opportunity, purchase the object, continue the habit, or hold on to the familiar patterns simply because it feels rewarding in the present moment. Yet the second awakening makes it increasingly difficult to overlook consequences once you have genuinely recognized them. This is not about supernatural prediction. It is something far more grounded. Your awareness is becoming practical enough to recognize direction before destination. Once you clearly understand where a path is leading, pretending ignorance becomes emotionally exhausting because you know that every decision quietly shapes the future long before the future actually arrives. Eventually, another surprising change begins taking place, one that many people mistakenly interpret as losing their spiritual connection. The constant desire for extraordinary mystical experiences gradually softens. The need for every day to feel filled with powerful signs, emotional highs, dramatic breakthroughs, or unmistakable confirmations slowly begins disappearing. You stop searching for endless proof that something profound is happening. The urge to chase the next revelation, the next intense feeling, the next symbolic message, or the next unforgettable spiritual experience loses much of its urgency. At first, this quieter season can feel unsettling because excitement has often been confused with closeness. You may wonder whether your connection has weakened simply because life feels less dramatic than before. Yet what is actually changing is something much deeper. You are not losing your relationship with your inner wisdom. You are releasing the need to be constantly amazed by it. The second awakening gently teaches that genuine spiritual maturity is not measured by how often you experience extraordinary moments. It is revealed by your ability to remain deeply present, even when nothing spectacular seems to be happening, because your awareness no longer depends on constant emotional intensity. To recognize that truth is already quietly alive within you, and that quiet realization prepares you for the next layer of the journey. As this deeper transformation continues unfolding, you begin realizing that your relationship with spirituality itself is quietly changing in ways that are easy to overlook if you are expecting constant moments of wonder. During your first awakening, extraordinary experiences often felt essential because they shattered the illusion that ordinary life was all there was. Every meaningful coincidence, every powerful realization, every unexpected moment of connection seemed to confirm that existence contained hidden layers waiting to be discovered. Those experiences mattered because they opened your perception beyond what you had previously accepted as reality. They gave your heart permission to believe that life carried a depth you had never imagined. Yet the second awakening slowly redirects your attention away from constantly searching for those extraordinary moments. Instead of asking spirituality to appear through dramatic experiences, you begin allowing it to quietly shape the way you move through each ordinary day. It begins expressing itself through your choices rather than your excitement. It becomes present in the patience with which you listen, the honesty with which you respond, the courage with which you respond in yourself in subtle situations that once seemed insignificant. You become more attentive to what is already unfolding directly in front of you, instead of needing every meaningful moment to arrive wrapped in mystery or symbolism. Because of this, the second awakening may appear less dramatic to anyone observing from the outside, yet within you, something far more authentic is taking root. You gradually discover that the deepest expression of spirituality is not found in endlessly pursuing remarkable experiences. It is found in your ability to continue living according to truth, even during seasons when nothing extraordinary seems to be happening. Your path no longer depends upon constant reassurance that you are moving in the right direction. It quietly becomes woven into your everyday existence, and in that simplicity, it develops a strength that dramatic experiences alone could never provide. Looking back, it becomes easier to understand why the first awakening often feels so unforgettable. Everything about it announces itself with unmistakable intensity. Your perspective expands almost overnight. Beliefs that once seemed unquestionable suddenly begin transforming. Your understanding of yourself, your past, and the world around you shifts so dramatically that familiar life appears completely different. Experiences you ignored for years suddenly seem filled with meaning. Questions about your identity, the purpose behind your struggles, the influence of old wounds, and the persistent feeling that something greater has always existed beneath ordinary reality all rise to the surface at once. The contrast is impossible to ignore because there is a clear dividing line between the person you once were and the awareness you have now entered. It feels as though reality itself has opened before your eyes, leaving no possibility of returning to the old way of seeing. The second awakening rarely introduces itself with that same level of emotional intensity. Instead of arriving like a dramatic revelation, it often slips quietly into your life through subtle changes that accumulate over time. There may never be one unforgettable day when you can confidently point to a single moment and declare that everything changed forever. More often, the transformation reveals itself through countless small decisions that gradually reshape your entire inner world. You begin recognizing excuses you once accepted without question, and they no longer persuade you. Desires that once seemed irresistible lose their influence because you finally understand what they have been asking you to sacrifice. Patterns that once unfolded automatically are interrupted before they can fully repeat themselves because your awareness now notices them as they begin instead of after they have already shaped another chapter of your life. This quiet evolution is precisely why so many people fail to recognize that the second awakening has already begun. They continue waiting for another overwhelming experience that mirrors the first awakening, another surge of emotion, another dramatic confirmation, another unmistakable sign that reality is revealing a hidden doorway. Yet the second awakening often has no interest in opening another secret entrance. Instead, it gently strengthens your willingness to stop walking through doors you already know no longer belong to your future. This distinction changes everything. The first awakening primarily transforms what you believe. The second awakening transforms what you are no longer capable of accepting. That difference reaches much deeper because beliefs can shift remarkably fast. A single conversation, one powerful insight, or one meaningful experience can completely reorganize your understanding of the world. But your daily life is ultimately shaped not by what you claim to believe, but by what you continue allowing into your experience. What you tolerate quietly becomes what you repeat. What you repeatedly accept slowly becomes what feels normal. What becomes normal eventually constructs the future you find yourself living, whether you intended it or not. This is why the second awakening often expresses itself through an increasing inability to compromise with things that once seemed harmless. Familiar routines begin feeling uncomfortable because you can finally recognize where they are leading. Decisions that once appeared insignificant suddenly carry tremendous emotional weight because you now understand the future they are slowly creating. Ambitions you once pursued with determination may begin feeling strangely empty, not because achievement itself has lost value, but because those goals were originally created by a version of yourself that wanted relief from pain more than genuine alignment with truth. During the first awakening, your vocabulary expands as your consciousness expands. During the second awakening, your private life begins changing in ways that require no audience, no recognition, and no performance. This is why its influence ultimately reaches further. Although it may seem quieter on the surface, it transforms parts of your life that the first awakening never fully touched. The first awakening allows you to recognize the existence of unhealthy patterns. The second awakening makes remaining inside those patterns emotionally unbearable. This transformation is rarely glamorous. Often it appears through deeply personal moments of honesty. You finally admit that a dream you pursued for years never truly belonged to your heart. You recognize that what you once called peace was actually emotional numbness protecting you from difficult truths. You realize that waiting for a catastrophic collapse is no longer necessary before acknowledging that something has quietly stopped being right for you. These realizations often arrive without dramatic announcements, making the second awakening seem almost invisible while it is unfolding. Yet beneath that quiet surface, something extraordinary is taking place. Rather than filling your life with new identities, new labels, or new experiences, it patiently removes the silent agreements you unknowingly accepted long ago. It begins dissolving the agreement to keep postponing your own life until the perfect moment arrives. It dissolves the agreement to become smaller in order to remain comfortable or accepted. It dissolves the agreement to settle for less simply because familiarity feels safer than change. One by one, those invisible contracts lose their authority over you, and as they disappear, they prepare the foundation for the next stage of your awakening, where living in alignment becomes less about discovering something new and more about refusing to betray what you already know is true. When those silent agreements finally begin dissolving, the transformation reaches far beneath the surface of your daily life. The change is not that you suddenly wake up as an entirely different person. The deeper shift is that you become incapable of returning to the version of yourself who would have accepted those old compromises without ever questioning them. Something inside you has changed too completely to continue pretending that the life which once felt acceptable still reflects who you are becoming. This is one of the quiet miracles of the second awakening. It rarely announces itself with dramatic declarations, yet it steadily reshapes the foundation from which every future decision will be made. At the same time, one of the most confusing experiences many people encounter during this stage begins unfolding in a way that can easily be misunderstood. The signs that once seemed to appear everywhere may gradually become less obvious. Repeating numbers may no longer catch your attention with the same frequency. Synchronicities that once felt impossible to ignore may seem increasingly rare. The messages that previously arrived with unmistakable clarity may become softer, subtler, and far less dramatic. Those small moments that once filled you with reassurance may appear to fade into silence. If you are unprepared for this shift, fear can quietly enter your thoughts. You may begin wondering whether your connection has weakened. You may question whether something inside you has become blocked. You may even ask yourself whether the universe has somehow stopped communicating altogether. Those questions can feel especially unsettling if your first awakening was filled with constant signs that gave you confidence whenever uncertainty appeared. When repeated confirmation becomes familiar, silence can easily be mistaken for abandonment. Yet the second awakening often changes guidance itself rather than removing it. During the earlier stages of awakening, external signs serve an essential purpose because they interrupt the habits of perception you carried for so many years. They capture your attention precisely because they challenge the belief that life is merely random and disconnected. They encourage you to pause long enough to consider that something greater may be quietly operating beneath ordinary experience. During the first awakening, those moments matter deeply because you are still learning to trust that reality contains layers of meaning you were never taught to recognize. However, if external confirmation remains necessary forever, it can slowly become another attachment, another subtle dependency that prevents your own inner wisdom from fully maturing. Eventually, a more challenging question begins rising within your awareness. How much confirmation do you truly need before admitting that a deeper part of you has already recognized the answer? Perhaps those repeating signs were never intended to become permanent instructions. Perhaps they were temporary supports designed to help you develop a different way of listening. They slowed your racing thoughts long enough for you to notice what had always been quietly present beneath distraction and noise. They encouraged you to trust your perception while it was still developing, yet their purpose was never to replace your own inner authority. Their purpose was to guide you back toward it. The universe has not necessarily become silent simply because familiar signs appear less frequently. It may instead be inviting you to stop placing all of your trust outside yourself. In that sense, the apparent disappearance of signs may itself become one of the clearest messages you could receive. It signals that your journey is gradually shifting away from constant external confirmation and toward genuine embodiment. Rather than searching outside yourself each time uncertainty arises, you begin recognizing that quiet certainty was already present before any sign appeared to validate it. As this internal trust grows stronger, your relationship with spirituality becomes calmer, steadier, and far less dependent upon dramatic experiences. You no longer require every moment to carry extraordinary symbolism before allowing it to matter. You stop examining reality as though it must continually prove that you are on the correct path. You stop interpreting every season of silence as evidence that you have somehow failed. You begin understanding that authentic guidance does not always arrive through breathtaking moments or unmistakable miracles. Sometimes it appears with remarkable simplicity. You already recognize which situations consistently leave you emotionally exhausted. You already know which opportunities quietly call your heart forward. You already understand which conversations, responsibilities, or decisions you continue postponing despite knowing exactly why they matter. You already sense which choice would allow you to respect yourself more deeply. You already recognize when something has completed its purpose in your life, even if no dramatic ending ever takes place. During your first awakening, signs often felt magical because they seemed to arrive from beyond yourself at exactly the moment you needed reassurance. Their timing filled you with wonder because they reminded you that life was more mysterious than you had believed. During the second awakening, however, the deepest sense of wonder gradually shifts inward. The true miracle is no longer found primarily in what appears around you. It is discovered in the growing stability taking root within you. The path has not disappeared simply because the signs have become quieter. In many cases, they become quieter because the path is no longer asking to be discovered somewhere outside your own awareness. It has begun living within the choices you make, the integrity you practice, and the truth you refuse to abandon even when no visible confirmation arrives. If you have remained present throughout this entire reflection, that alone speaks to something meaningful unfolding within you. This conversation was never intended to offer easy comfort or convenient spiritual reassurance. It invites something much more demanding, an honest willingness to observe yourself without hiding behind familiar explanations. If you recognize your own experience within this second awakening, there is no need to rush toward immediate conclusions or force every part of the process into a clear definition today. Not every lesson needs to be fully understood before it can begin transforming your life. There is nothing you must prove either to yourself or to anyone watching your journey. Continue choosing the truth that quietly resonates within your own heart, even when it asks for patience instead of certainty, even when it feels gentler than you expected, even when it requires more courage than comfort. This stage still carries extraordinary gifts, not because it guarantees that life will suddenly become effortless or perfect, but because it gradually makes it impossible to continue living in ways that betray who you genuinely are. So continue moving forward with steady faith. Continue paying attention to what your life is patiently revealing through every ordinary moment. Continue honoring the quiet wisdom that no longer depends upon constant signs to recognize itself. And above all else, be gentle with yourself as this deeper awakening continues unfolding, because the honesty growing within you is becoming one of the greatest forms of guidance you will ever receive, and it will continue leading you exactly where you need to go.